Hello, I'm Adrian, welcome back to All Booked Up. Today we are doing a long-awaited video on this channel, well, long-awaited for me at least, and that is my top 10 fantasy series of all time. So this is a countdown from 10 to 1, and there are a few criteria that series are going to have to make it onto my list. So first of all, I am grouping some series together, particularly those set in the same universe or in a shared universe, mainly because I don't want them to take multiple slots on this list and because it's my list and I can do it how I want. As well as that, this list is only going to contain series where I have either completed the entire series or where I am up to date in the series. So if it is still one that's being written and being released, I have to be at least up to date with the current material for it to make it onto this list. So without any further ado, let's jump straight in with number 10. So my number 10 favourite fantasy series of all time is the War Trilogy by R.F. Kuang. This is a trilogy, it's a 3-book series starting with the Poppy War, followed by the Dragon Republic, and then the Burning God. For a bit of context, this is an Asian-inspired, particularly a China-inspired fantasy setting. Is based in the country of Nikan, and we follow our main protagonist Rin. Rin is a poor young girl who takes the national test that all people take and manages to score well enough to get accepted into the highest military academy in the land. So there is definitely, at the start of this series, quite a standard school setting, sort of fantasy school setting that we see a lot in fantasy. About halfway through the first book, however, this takes a sharp turn, and I think this catches many people off guards, and it becomes a grimdark military fantasy, essentially. Now, many people love this sort of sharp veering to one direction. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was done very well, and I think the series benefits from it greatly. I would say that the grimdark elements are pretty brutal, and knowing that a lot of it is based on actual history of China in the 20th century, it becomes even more disturbing in so many ways. I do think, unfortunately, this series could have been much, much higher up my list had Kuang nailed the final book of this series. Unfortunately for me, The Burning God was definitely the weakest book in this series, although how it wrapped up the series in terms of the very end, I enjoyed and I thought was good. The final book just really struggled. It was slow and it didn't feel like we got the resolution for things that I wanted. And unfortunately that made that definitely the weakest book in this series. The first 2 books were 4 and 5-star reads for me. I absolutely loved them. Unfortunately, the ending of the series with The Burning God has dragged it down somewhat. I know that that's an unpopular opinion of mine to not particularly like it, so your mileage may vary. Moving on to number 9, and this is going to be the Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan. This trilogy starts with A Promise of Blood, and it is the only flintlock fantasy we have on this list. It is very much an industrial fantasy, think sort of French Revolution era in terms of the technology. We've got gunpowder and we have magic. I really enjoyed the magic system of this book. It has multiple elements. So there's a very hard magic system for the powder mages who use gunpowder to magically be able to do different abilities. And then there's the privileged as well, who, although much more mystical, also have a relatively hard magic system. And then we have some more soft magic systems in the background. I thought the series was written really well by Brian McClellan. I definitely think A Promise of Blood, the first book, is the weakest book in this series. I think the 2 follow-ups, however, are much, much better. I really enjoyed The Crimson Campaign and An Autumn Republic. I thought both of them were very good, and hence why it's made it up to number 9 in this list. In at number 8 is a series that is very controversial for a lot of fantasy fans. It had a lot of love as it started off, and I know a lot of people disliked the ending for this series, and that is Lightbringer by Brent Weeks. For those of you who don't know about Lightbringer, it is another classical hard magic system that we have here, and for lots of people the magic system was definitely the draw at the beginning of this series. Essentially, if you have the ability, if you're a drafter, you can, as you see colours, you can draft them and create them into a material called Luxin. So depending on what colours you have the ability to draft, you can draft different colours of looks in, which have different properties and abilities, and that is sort of the basics of this magic system for this world. We follow some very interesting characters in this series. We particularly follow a young boy called Kip, who is definitely a little bit annoying for some people, but I think grows really well throughout the series. And we follow Gavin as well, who is a particularly powerful person in this world, both magically and politically, as well as following a slew of other characters throughout the series. This is controversial, as I know many people really struggled with the end of book 4 and the finale, book 5. I know that the Burning White, particularly book 5, was something that a lot of people disliked. They accused Brent Weeks of using Deus Ex Machina and for not necessarily setting up earlier in the series the direction he was going to take here at the end. For me personally, I actually quite enjoyed the Burning White. It was definitely one of the weaker books in the series, but I still enjoyed it. I thought it did a decent job of ending the series, if not exceptional. And therefore, I really enjoyed the series. Certainly, book 2, 3, and 4 for me were brilliant. Book 1 and 5 were slightly weaker, but you're always going to have a slightly weaker first book when you've got so much to introduce in this magic system and in this world and the countries and all that stuff. So I expect that from book 1. It's unfortunate he didn't nail the landing, but he landed it well enough for me for this to still be super high in my top 8, number 8 in my top 10 series of all time. We are moving on now to number 7, and this is where this list got particularly crunched, where it was really difficult to start picking favourites of one series over another. These sort of 7 to 4 could get flipped around depending on the day you ask me, so these next few are very, very close for me. So in at number 7 is The Greatcoats by Sebastian de Castell. This is a series, a quartet, a 4-book series that I have only just finished, and that is actually one of the reasons it's in at number 7 and it's not going any higher yet. I really feel like I need to sit on this series a little longer. I need to really let it settle, let me have some space from it and really digest what happened in it before I can say this is going any higher on this list. Personally, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great, but I just need a bit more time to really check that that's not just a new book infatuation. So in The Greatcoats, we follow Falcio, who is known as the first Cantor of the Greatcoats. He's the leader of the Greatcoats, along with his 2 friends and colleagues, Kest and Brasti. So the Greatcoats are an organisation founded by the now dead king. They were an organisation of travelling magisters who went around judging on different conflicts and different trials around the land. They had the right to judge how they felt was fair, following the law of the land, no matter who they were judging against. So it was a way of holding in check the dukes and other nobility and stopping them from taking advantage of those of lower means. The Greatcoats often had to defend their verdicts by duelling a duke's champion, so they are well known as high quality swordsmen and duelists, and as such we see a lot of that. This is definitely a swashbuckling adventure. Now, with the death of the king, they are relegated to very much a hated portion of society. They don't really have the chance to be travelling magistrates anymore, and Falcio, Kest and Brasti are trying to work out how to pursue the king's dream in a world where the king is now dead and where the Greatcoats themselves are hated. This series was brilliant for me. It is full of pretty dark moments with wonderful heroic upsides, so the contrast between those two things is incredible. I think there are brilliant heroic speeches and there is brilliant swashbuckling moments that if you want a relatively light-hearted but still serious fantasy, this series could absolutely be for you. We are now in at number 6, and this is a series, currently 2 books out, by Nicholas Ames, and this is the Ban series. So this begins with Kings of the Wild, and the follow-up sequel is Bloody Rose. This series is absolutely wonderful. This series I went into knowing it was going to be light-hearted, comedic. There's definitely a very fun element to it. And you may have heard the idea that actually this first book, Kings of the Wild, has a lot of 80s band references in and sort of classic rock references, which I think is hilarious if you get them. I probably missed most of them, but I did pick up a few and it was brilliant. And in Kings of the Wild, we are following Slowhand Clay Cooper and his former band of retired mercenaries who are going on one last adventure. The tagline you see for this is "The boys are back in town." There you go. So this is a really wonderful, light-hearted romp that towards the end really started hitting me emotionally. I had not expected the turn this took to actually really give me the feels. It really delivered gut punches to me on a couple of occasions and made me tear up when I thought I was just going for a light-hearted fantasy romp. This changes quite dramatically for Bloody Rose, the follow-up, where it is, in my opinion, less funny. It's still light-hearted, but it's not got the comedic chops that I think Kings of the Wild does. However, it is much more serious from the get-go. And I think the way that Ames sort of pivots this series, we follow a different set of characters, and Ames pivots to make this a much more thematic experience, while still having the world that we had in Kings of the Wild and sort of the humour, particularly the humorous background of Kings of the Wild moving into Bloody Rose. However, I think thematically he dealt with some themes really, really well, whether that be themes of parenthood or loss or grief or addiction. I think he dealt with those really, really well, and I love Bloody Rose just as much as I love Kings of the Wild, if in a very different way. So yeah, absolutely deserving of my number 6 spot, not quite edging into my top 5 fantasy series. In at number 5 is going to be the only urban fantasy installment in this list, and that is the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Now, if you've watched much of my channel, you might have heard me talk about this before, but Dresden Files was the series that got me back into reading as an adult, particularly reading fantasy as an adult. I picked up the audiobooks of this on a recommendation from a friend, and it absolutely blew me away. For those of you who don't know, the context for the first book in the series is that Harry Dresden is a practicing wizard in our world. He advertises in the phone book as a wizard. He is also a private investigator, and he takes on jobs for people trying to find lost things, normal PI stuff, but he is a wizard. One of the main places he picks up jobs is from the CPD, so the Chicago Police Department, and he semi-often helps them with investigations as well. This is very much a noir detective story with fantasy trappings over the top of it, and I found that very, very interesting for the first few books of the series. Currently there are now 17 Dresden Files books out, and as we progress through this series it becomes less of noir detective standalones and it starts to become an overarching epic fantasy, essentially, set in our world. And the way that Jim Butcher does this is really, really amazing. I think the slow creep and change from that noir detective to sort of a very epic level fantasy series, I think, is incredible. Particularly the books around book 11, 12, 13 onwards are incredible. There are some really good highlights early on as well. We really get to focus in on Harry. We are in the first person perspective, so we are in his head. He is snarky and witty and a bit of a smart ass, and it's hilarious. I really enjoy Harry, and I think the cast of characters that we gain around him, whether that be Murphy or Michael or any of the others that I'm not going to say for spoiler reasons, is just incredible. And I think the way that Jim Butcher develops that throughout the series is just mwah, it's chef's kiss. It's brilliant. We are moving on to my number 4 series of all time, and this is where you might start accusing me of cheating a little bit. So in at number 4 is the Banished Land Saga by John Gwynne. Now this is a sort of overarching world and series that has 2 different series set within it. That is The Faithful and the Fallen, which is a 4-book series starting with Malice, and then we have Of Blood and Bone, which is a trilogy starting with A Time of Dread that follows on in the same world about, I don't remember the exact time after I think it's 100 and 150 years after, maybe. There's a good chunk of time between these 2 series. Now, for me here, The Faithful and the Fallen is definitely my favourite of these 2 series, but Of Blood and Bone is brilliant and great in its own right. The Faithful and the Fallen particularly, John Gwynne manages to use a lot of your standard fantasy tropes, but he uses them in a very good way. Now, often when I say that, people are going to think I mean he subverts them in interesting ways. Not necessarily, although he does sometimes. What I think John Gwynne does is he employs tropes and uses them for what they're good for. Like, there's a reason that there are tropes. We have them for a reason, and that's because they work. That's because people engage with them, people enjoy them, and they work for what you're trying to do. And I think that John Gwynne does a really good job of using these tropes, knowing he's using them, but using them in a way that actually really works, and they fit together really nicely to sort of inform and build his narrative. Now, he doesn't mind subverting a trope here or there as well, which is brilliant, and I'm a big fan of that as well, but he's not afraid to use these tropes for what they are. As well as that use of tropes, John Gwynne is an incredible writer of combat, of action scenes. So often in fantasy, I find we can get lost in what's actually happening in a combat scene, and often it's just really a matter of who won at the end. That's what matters. That's never the case with John Gwynne. Throughout The Faithful and the Fallen, there are some books where it is basically action all the way through. There are others where it's a bit of a better mix. But when we get action scenes, they are not just there for the sake of having something interesting to happen. There is always something going on behind the scenes, whether that be character growth, character development, interpersonal conflict. Whatever it is expressed through the action scenes, and he writes them so well that I never felt lost. I never didn't know what was going on, who was where. It never just became like a malaise of stuff that was happening to me. It was always so clearly written and really interestingly written, and I knew what the stakes were for each combat all the time, and it was more so than just who wins, who loses. And I find that super interesting. I think he did that incredibly well. I think John Gwynne's use of animal companions is amazing, and I think as well that the way he writes certain characters is just brilliant. Now, there is one character who, again, we don't necessarily see till a little bit later in the series, so I'm not going to tell you who it is. If you've read this series, you will know. There is one character who is possibly my favourite character in fantasy, and he's not even a main character. He's probably fourth or fifth on the list of people you class as main characters in The Faithful and the Fallen. And his arc is amazing. John Gwynne gives him a revenge arc, and it just is brilliant. I absolutely adore this character. I adore the way he's written. I think some of the passages concerning him and what he has to go through have some of the best prose in the entire series in The Faithful and the Fallen. And I think the way that John Gwynne writes this character's relationships, both in the positive and the negative, is just brilliant. And I absolutely adore this character, and I think he might be one of my favourite fantasy characters for a long time to come. If you have not read any John Gwynne, read this series. Or your other option is you can start reading The Shadow of the Gods when that comes out in the beginning of May, which is a whole new series and a whole new world. Go and read it. It is fantastic. Moving on to my top three. And for those of you who have been around my channel for a little while, these will probably be no surprise. Particularly this one in at number 3. It is The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. You've probably seen me talk about the series before. I seem to mention it in every other video I do. It is such a wonderful quartet of books. So it starts with A Shadow in Summer. The world we get given here from Daniel Abraham is another Eastern-inspired world setting. It kind of feels to me like it pulls from Japanese world elements quite a lot. We are in the cities of the Kaiem, who are a bunch of city-states who each city has an ondot. Now, the ondot are essentially concepts or ideas spoken into reality. They are made manifest, and they become creatures that have the ability to essentially affect the concept that they were described as. The people who describe these beings are called poets, and they're essentially the wizards or the mages of this world. Now, the cities of the Kaiem are the only nation that we see that can actually bind the ondot and to have them take form, and these ondot give them incredible advantages in terms of economic advantages, as well as the ability to wage war if they had decided to do that. So we are following a couple of characters who are poets, as well as multiple other characters who are not, as they engage with the Ondot and they try to work out philosophically what is right or wrong when they essentially have their own little pocket gods. This series develops incredibly well. There is big time jumps between each book, about 14 years between each of the books in the series. So we go from following teenagers in A Shadow in Summer to following 60-odd-year-olds in A Price of Spring. And therefore we get to see a whole range of growth from these characters, whether it be in the books or whether it be in the intervening time periods between the books. I think it is done incredibly well. Ota, one of the main characters that we start with, is one of my favourite characters in fantasy. He is brilliant. And Daniel Abraham writes this in a way where the themes that are dealt with are so well done. I found it particularly touching as a relatively young father. My daughter is 18 months now. And the themes of parenthood and personal responsibility and what you pass on to the next generation, how we try to make the world better for those who follow after us, I found really touching. I think the prose of Daniel Abraham is really well done. It is not super flowery, it's not over the top, but it just hits the right spot. He words things in just such clever, concise ways that really hit in a different way and make you think about things in a way you wouldn't necessarily have done so before. And I think that An Autumn War, book 3 of the series, and A Price of Spring, book 4 in the series, just looking back at the previous 2 books, just make them so much better. They make the first 2 books in the series so much better because of how they use what we have seen in those books, as we use the history of our characters to inform what happens going forward. And I just think that's done so amazingly well. This is a series of 4 books that are all about 350 pages. You should read this series. The character development is so strong for such a short amount of pages that I can't recommend this series enough. Please go and read it. It is amazing. And coming in at number 2 is a big overarching series that I'm going to use to encompass multiple series that I love. It shouldn't be a surprise to many of you, and this is The Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. So I've got the first book of each of the series up here because I feel like I should actually show you some books on this channel for once in my life. The Cosmere is a wonderful, it's a masterpiece is over the top, because it's not a masterpiece in terms of its writing style, in terms of its prose, in terms of necessarily the themes it's dealing with. I think just the concept of it, the way that it is multiple sub-series with a big overarching series and it all fits together, you can start piecing bits together, is wonderful. And I think being here for the ride as it's written is definitely the way to do it. It's a bit like Discworld, for those of you who know Discworld, where it is a big overarching world, but there are many different sub-series going on within it. For me personally, the first Mistborn trilogy, starting with Mistborn The Final Empire, is probably currently my favourite series in the Cosmere. I think that the first trilogy of Mistborn is such a wonderful trilogy. It is really plotted out and works out really well in terms of making sure that it works for a 3-book format. I think the character growth is brilliant, and I think the real strength of Brandon Sanderson in so many ways is his plotting. It's his world building and his plotting. You can see the little breadcrumbs he drops in The Final Empire that come to fruition at the end of Hero of Ages, the last book in that series. And you are amazed that you haven't worked it out. That you haven't worked out what's going on, even though he's given you every single bit of information you needed to work it out. And yet we still don't get there. So I love the mystery elements of that series. I love how it's plotted. And then we look at something like the Stormlight Archive, starting with The Way of Kings. Now this series is not a tight trilogy like Mistborn. It is going to be a 10-book series. Currently 4 of those books are out. And it is not tightly plotted like Mistborn. It hasn't got that going for it, but it still has incredibly well thought through world building. The world we get in Way of Kings and the rest of Stormlight Archive is just brilliant. The cultures make sense and they are different and they are so otherworldly to us, yet we see such shared humanity in them. And I think that is one of the wonderful things we get with fantasy. As well as that, I think the way that Brandon Sanderson writes people who have struggles with their mental health, so the mental health representation and how it's written in Stormlight is incredible. And I think that although not perfect and never perfect, I think Brandon shows that he really wants to understand, he wants to research and understand what he's writing as much as possible, so he can give a really clear and helpful view of these mental health struggles that people go through. And I think that the Stormlight Archive achieves that so well, and I am super hyped for book 5 coming in a couple of years. That will finish that first half arc of the Stormlight Archive. As well as that, there are wonderful standalones in this series. I adore Warbreaker. Warbreaker is an absolute brilliant book, as you might have seen on my top 5 fantasy standalones video. It is so good. It works so well as a standalone, and I think the character development is amazing. And again, the twists we get that we should have seen coming, yet somehow I didn't. I'm sure some people did, but I did not, and it hurt me. And Brandon knows how to hurt me in these books, and I can't blame him for it. I think it's brilliant. I've probably spoken for far too long about the Cosmic, considering you probably all know about it anyway. But there you go, number 2 in my top 10 fantasy series of all time. And we're moving on to number 1. So at number 1, my top favourite fantasy series of all time currently. So from what I've read, this is my absolute favourite series. And this is, look at the mass market paperbacks. Look at them, beautiful, no hardcovers needed here. It is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and then finished off by Brandon Sanderson. Now, The Wheel of Time is a series that I have only got to recently. I started reading this last March and finished it this February. So it took me almost a year to read this series, and that's because it is a 15-book series if you include the prequel, A New Spring, and they are not small books. They are chunky books, yeah? They're like, most of them are about 800 pages, give or take. So there is a lot of pages to consume in this series. And as you would expect for a series this long, the character work and the character development is brilliant. And it should be. You've got 14 huge chunky books to do it, so I would expect wonderful character development. We do, however, get that, and I think Robert Jordan has done that incredibly well. I think Brandon Sanderson's done well to finish off this series following from Robert Jordan's notes and trying to be as faithful to how Robert Jordan would have ended the series as he could have managed. For many people, the character development is too slow though, because in a 14-book series, you want to spread that out. You want it to take time. And I know a lot of people by book 5 or 6 are frustrated at how little some characters have actually managed to change and evolve. And I understand that. But I think for me, I approached it knowing I was going to be patient, knowing I was taking my time with the series. And I absolutely love how it progressed, how it built, and how characters changed, how they had to struggle to change in the way they should and not to be changed in a negative way. And I think that's incredible. I think that's really well done. My other huge positive for The Wheel of Time is the world. I have never read a series where the world has felt quite so real to me. Randland, as people refer to it, is such a wonderful world, and I feel like I know each of the places so well. Each of the nations, each of the cities, I feel like I know them as well as I know my own country. I think they are so well realised, and I know a lot of that is done in what people would call bogged down prose. So a lot of it comes through clothing description and food description and description about cultures and how they talk. And I get that that can slow it down, okay? That can make it feel like the plot doesn't move. If you are reading this for the plot, I'm not sure this is going to be a series you love. Although I do think the plot is good, it is slow. It moves slowly. It is not a thriller. It is not action-packed. But stuff happens. We've got 14 main series books that things do happen and people grow, and it it is just a brilliant, brilliant series for me. I do agree what people say, that there is a bit of a slog in the middle. People will say that it goes from anywhere from book 7 to book 10. I personally found book 10 was the sloggy book. That was the book I really struggled with. Book 8 and 9, I didn't love as much as the rest of the series, but they weren't a pain to read. They weren't something that I struggled to read. Book 10 was, but that's okay. Like, that's fine. I knew that I'm already committed at that point. I enjoyed the previous 9 books. I know there are 4 more to go, and I can see the end, and I can see how we're going to get there, and I could get through it, yeah? And I think that's fine. I think Robert Jordan picks up in book 11, Knife of Dreams, really well, and he gets the series moving again, and then Brandon Sanderson finishes it off as well as I think you could expect anybody to. Anybody who hasn't been the initial author of this series, I don't think anyone would have done it necessarily any better than Brandon managed to. I like that at the end we got really good resolution. We felt satisfied with how it ended, yet we didn't know everything. We didn't know all the answers to everything, and I like that. I like that little bit of mystery that we get left, as well as the big satisfying ending. All in all, I cannot recommend The Wheel of Time enough. I know it is not going to be for everybody. I know lots of people will not get on with this series. I know it's going to be too slow for people, that people are going to struggle with the slog, that the descriptive prose is not going to be for everyone, but I think it is so worth it if you do enjoy the first couple of books, to push through and really get a sense for this world that was being built for you. And I felt so lost in this world in a year when I really needed to escape from our current world, as I'm sure many of you know, in this previous year. Yeah, I needed a world to escape to, and The Wheel of Time was that world, and I will be forever thankful for that series. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that it's been interesting, that maybe you've found some series you've not heard of before, or that you've not got around to reading yet. Let me know what you think. What are your favourite series of all time? Let me know in the comments. If you like the video, leave it a like, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all again soon.